In spite of the fact that I'm always preaching how accessible primitive pottery is as a hobby, I also recognize that primitive pottery can be really hard to get started in. You've got to find a good wild clay. You've got to figure out how much temper to use in that clay. You've got to figure out kind of how to work with it, because every clay is different. You have to figure out where you can fire that pottery. You have to kind of figure out what fuels work for firing pottery in your area. You need to figure out what kind of pigment minerals are around and how you can process those and make pigments that you can use on your pottery. So there's a lot of things to figure out getting started in primitive pottery, and I realize that. Where I live in southern Arizona, I've been doing primitive pottery for decades, and so I've kind of know all that stuff. So I've never really been able to show you. I mean, I have tried the struggle to kind of get started in primitive pottery. But this year, I'm spending the summer up here in Montana. And although Montana is blessed with an abundance of wild clay, I don't know about those clays. I don't know how much temper to use. I don't know how much shrinkage to expect. I don't know how those clays will react to being fired. I don't know what kind of fuel exists around here that might be good for firing pottery or good places to fire pottery. I don't know anything about the pigments. So in a sense, this summer, I'm starting over. I'm doing the same thing that many of you are doing, in that I'm trying to kind of figure out the ground rules to get started in primitive pottery in this area. On top of that, I left most of my tools in southern Arizona. I don't have a corn grinder. I don't have some of the things I'm used to having for processing clay, for example, or pigments. And so I'm hoping that this series of videos that I'm starting today will kind of bring you into that world of getting started in primitive pottery and show you kind of how you go through those steps, how you get started. So I've got no shortage of work to do, so we better get started. So I'm not starting completely from scratch. I spent some time here exploring for wild clays 2 years ago, and I did find quite a few. I never had a chance to use any though, so I am kind of in the blind that way. Now, when I collected those clays, I was with my friend Justin Deacon, and he did try some of them, and so he's also given me a few clues. So this clay on the side of US Highway 12 seemed really good to me. It looked like a lot of those pure clays I collect on the Colorado Plateau in Arizona. But my friend Justin, again, has told me that this stuff seems to have a high shrinkage rate. So I collected some of this clay as soon as I got here. I went ahead and processed this, but as I processed it, again, I didn't have a corn grinder. I just ground it up with a rock on a sidewalk, and I tempered it with sand that I collected in the local area. So I was able to find all the ingredients I needed relatively simply, but I don't know how those are going to react. I don't know about this sand I collected, for example. I don't know if it has calcium in it that might cause spalls later or something like that. It is very, very fine, kind of naturally separated into a very pure and fine sand. So hopefully it works. So I tempered it with a lot of sand. Because he told me it has a high shrinkage rate, I put 1/3 temper in it, which is kind of the top end. You get more than 1/3 temper and you start losing plasticity. So at this point, I'm not sure how that's going to work out, whether that 1/3 temper is going to make for a really good clay or if it's going to be a problem. If it turns out that this clay is not plastic enough, of course, I'll have to add more clay to it. So having mixed this clay up and tempered it, I let it sit wrapped up in a bag for a weekend. That way it had the most chance to become plastic and usable. The other thing I collected while I was out was some of this pigment material. I don't know how it's going to work, but it seems to be high iron material that I can use for pigment. Another thing I have learned from Justin is that he says a lot of these local clays will fire brown. And so I am also looking for something that'll fire some different colors, some contrasting colors, so I can do some decorations on the pottery. Hopefully like a white clay or something that's very light colored, maybe even like a buff or a cream colored clay, that then I could paint some of this iron oxide material on and get like red on buff, red on brown. Maybe if I reduced it, I could get something close to black on white or black on gray. If you're in a similar situation, you're looking to find some clays in your area, the best thing to do is just find something that looks clay-like, process it, and just try it. That at least gives you a baseline. That at least gives you some place to start. It might not be the best clay, but then as you go forward and test other clays, you'll have something to compare it to. So start with that first clay, which is what I'm doing here, and then go find another clay, maybe a better looking clay, maybe a different color. Try that. Now you have something to compare it to. Also, the amount of temper. If you find that this clay needs more or less temper, say it needs 20%, or maybe it needs 25 or 30%, then you're going to know what to give that next clay as a starting place. I always say 20% because that works for most of the clays in my area. But I might find up here that 30% is the standard, or I might find that that 30% is no good at all and I have to add 15%. You have to kind of, get an idea about how the clays in your area are and then use that as the baseline moving forward. This material here is fairly light in color, but it has a greenish cast to it. And I know that green in clay represents iron. And it's been my experience that green clay will fire to a yellowish or brownish color. And so I'm looking for a light colored clay. I'm looking for a white clay, but I'm going to avoid this for the time being because I don't think this is the stuff I'm looking for. Okay, so I've set up a little studio area here in my son's basement. Same way as if you were first starting out in primitive pottery, you'd have to find some place where you could work, where you wouldn't be making too big of a mess, in the living area, where you could kind of leave pots out to dry for a while and not worry about them being in the way or getting messed up. And so this basement studio works pretty well for my needs. Now I'm going to take that clay that I've already mixed up a couple days ago, should be nice and plastic, and I'm going to try making a pot out of it. I'm just going to make something real simple, a little bowl at this point. Now you might think I'm being cheap by just making a simple bowl. Well, maybe I'm being a little cheap, but the point is you don't want to put too much effort into a project before you've actually figured out if the clay is any good. So when you're first trying a clay, don't get too elaborate. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak if it breaks. And so I'll make a little bowl and then I'll take it out and fire it and we'll get an idea. We'll get an idea of the shrinkage rate of the clay, how workable it is, what color it fires. That'll give me a good idea going forward what I want to do with this clay. Now, if this clay turns out to be not plastic enough, that's a common problem with wild clays, then I might try cutting back the amount of temper I add, or I might even try processing it in such a way that I can remove some of those impurities, things like silt that might be in it. On the other hand, the clay might be too plastic. It might be very, very sticky, in which case you might add more temper. Another thing that commonly happens with wild clay when you first try them is the shrinkage is too much and it starts to crack. And so then you also have to add more temper. Now, hopefully I've already dealt with that. I have a third temper in here. You probably don't want to go close to 50% temper, although with some clays you can. And then as soon as it's dry, which, depends a lot on the weather where you're at. Fortunately here in Montana, it's pretty dry right now. I will take it out and fire it when that's done. And that'll give me a good idea moving forward what I can do. And then my next project can be a lot more elaborate because I'll have an idea of what I'm working with. I can make a more elaborate project with it. Or I might say, hey, this clay is no good at all. I'm going to throw this out. I'm going to go look for another clay. Unfortunately, here in southeastern Montana, there are a lot of clays around. So I'm sure I won't have a problem finding another clay if I need one. So I'll just be working on this old table down here. And I've got my clay there, and I also brought some tools with me. So I'm not really starting completely from scratch. I brought this kit full of my basic pottery tools like pookies and gourd scrapers, pieces of cloth, things that I use a lot. And so I'll be using those as I go forward working on this pot.
You might be wondering, what are you doing in eastern Montana? I mean, people visit Montana every year, but mostly western Montana. That's where there's Yellowstone National Park and Glacier National Park and all kinds of rivers and streams for fishing. And people don't go to eastern Montana, do they? Well, my son lives out here. He took a job out here 3 years ago as a seasonal wildland firefighter for the Bureau of Land Management. So because our grandson lives out here, we want to be out here and spend more time with him and be part of his life. And so we're spending a few months out here this summer. So in April of 2022, when they moved out here, I had my son sit down with me and I did an interview with him about his new job and where he was going and everything. And that was a behind the scenes video. I do those every month for channel members and Patreons. It's kind of an interesting look at him looking at this job before he actually came out here. And it's a good way to kind of see how my son is. That's still available online if you're a channel member or a patron, so I will put a link to that up above and down in the doobly-doo.
All right, today I'm out here looking for light colored clays to use as slips and for decorating my pottery, since I seem to have a pretty decent clay for building with. So far, I haven't fired it yet. So I'm out here on some BLM land just looking for those light colored clays. First thing I did, I went to the local BLM office. BLM is Bureau of Land Management, in case you don't know. I bought these maps, $4 a piece, so they're pretty inexpensive. They show all the land ownership in this area, so that's real helpful. That way I can figure out where I can go out and hike around without trespassing on some rancher's property. First thing I did is I looked at all the area around where I was staying, found where there was some reasonably sized large chunks of BLM land, and came out to check them out. The other thing I did was once I located those spots, I also looked at those using Google Maps with that aerial photography. And that way I can kind of see, if it's just grassland, it's kind of hard to see the clays, right? What I'm looking for is places where the ground's kind of opened up. There's some badlands around here, and in badlands you can really see those layers of clay. So that would be optimal. Or any place where there's kind of, some broken up country. And then also with that aerial photography, you can kind of get an idea of the colors that are out there, right? So if there's a lot of reds, you'll see a lot of reds in those exposed areas. Or if there's a lot of browns, you'll see browns. I'm looking for those light colors. I'm looking for light grays, whites, and you can see that here on this aerial photography that those areas that are light colored are actually showing up. Another thing you can do if the ground is generally covered with vegetation where you live is look at the color of water features. So where there's little lakes and ponds that are collecting runoff from the general area, you can sometimes see the color of the sediment that is suspended in those ponds. And when that water gets washed into those reservoirs, it's holding sediment that's collected all around that area. And right away, those larger particles, the sand particles, are going to settle to the bottom. So when you see these aerial photographs of ponds and lakes, and there's color to them like this, then that's color of clay. That's actual clay particles that are suspended in the water. That's a great indicator that there are clays that are similar in that color upstream from there. And so we can see here in the area where I'm at, these ponds have a light color. They have like a creamy color about them. That tells me there are light colored clays in this vicinity. Okay, out here on the prairie, not much to see, but look, across the way, down below me, there's some white material. All the way across the valley, there's some light material at the base of that big hill with the pines on it, but then also closer over there, that looks like the same material. See, because it's at about the same level of elevation as that spot there. So I'm going to hit this lower one, and then I'm going to come up and hit this higher one here, see what I can find. Okay, so here's the first spot. Light in color, but this area here, most of this has a lot of yellow in it. Kind of that yellow / green material, which I know is going to fire pink, or I suspect at least. Hate to say I know anything. And then this stuff here is weird because when you dig down into it, it's very dark. The light color is only on the surface, so I don't know if that light color is maybe just like an alkali crust, because once you get below the surface, it's really dark gray, almost black. So I'm not sure if I want that stuff. Okay, I've arrived and I have a bad feeling about this. You can see those dark layers in between the whites. I think that white material is, as we saw earlier, an alkali crust, and that it's going to be dark once we break through. Okay, you can see there is a light colored component here, but most of it is rather dark. So I'm going to collect some of this, but you really don't know. That dark colored clay could be anything. It's just that dark color comes from organic matter. And once that burns out in the firing, heaven knows what we've got. So I'm going to go ahead and collect some of this, but I'm not super hopeful. Now here's where things went really bad. You already knew it was kind of breezy today, but this big gust of wind took my hat off, and not only that, knocked my tripod over and broke my lens. So this is my big expensive lens that I use for most of my shooting, and you can see the mount separated from the lens. And I tried to get it fixed here in Montana, and I can't find a camera repair shop here in this part of the state. So I just had to order a new one. And I guess I'll try to get this fixed when I get back to Arizona. So in the meantime, while I'm waiting for that lens I ordered to arrive, I'm going to have to shoot everything with the smaller 20mm lens. So now I'm ready to start purifying these slips so that I can put them on the pot so that I can fire it and see what color they fire to. First thing I got to do is label everything, because if you don't label it, you're likely to forget where it came from. I'm making sure even the tubs I pour the clay into are labeled correctly. That way I can't forget. So I'm just going to put the clay in these tubs, cover them with water, and then just let them sit and soak for several hours. Okay, now that it's soaked up for a while, I'm ready to mix it up. Get your hand in there, just mix that clay up so that the clay particles are suspended in the water. And then I've got these little paint strainer bags I picked up at the hardware store. They just pop right over the top of the tub, and I'll just pour the clay through that. And that'll screen out anything that's like sand size or bigger. We don't need that much because it's just a slip, and it's just a test slip. So really just a small amount, less than you could fit in the palm of your hand, will be enough to test. So I'm really not worried about waste, and there is some in here. I could put some more water in it, run another load through, but again, not a big deal because I'm just testing this out. Okay, now that it's set and settled for a few hours, the clay is settled to the bottom and I can pour the pure water off the top. After that, it's ready to go. And so I can bring it down to my studio in the basement, and I'm ready to start painting that slip on the pot. This first clay I apply here is a clay that I picked up in Arizona on my way up. And the next two are those two that I collected here in Montana, which you can see as I get them on there. They're just barely lighter than the original clay I built it from. Okay, now that I've got that slip all painted on the outside, I'm going to do some painting on the outside to test a different material and also to label those different kinds of slip. So this is that yellow material I collected, and I'm just getting it wet and kind of crushing it up with a stone and smearing it around. It makes a pretty good paint. I'm thinking this is probably going to fire red, as most yellow clay will. And my new lens came in, so now I can shoot a little better, a little closer up, as you will see in the next segment. And so now I'm going to slip, and then I'm also going to polish the slip on the inside of the bowl. So on the outside of the bowl, I left it unpolished, polishing it on the inside. That way I can kind of see how it reacts in different situations. And then I'm also going to apply some paint on the inside, again, just to see how it reacts in different situations. And that's it. Now I just have to let it dry and find an opportunity to fire it. Well, firing turned out to be a bigger hassle than I thought it was going to be. For one thing, out here where my son lives, most of the country around here is just prairie. There's no trees where there's fuel you can burn to fire pottery. I suppose there's cow manure, and that's something I may explore next time. But I was looking for regular firewood because that's what I'm used to using at home. And, these spots are not that common. The second problem was the weather. Here, it's either windy or it's raining, or, it's wet because it just rained a couple days ago. And so I've waited a long time, like a week, to get out here and fire today when the weather is nice. And if I was working a full-time job, I wouldn't be here because today's Monday and the wind blew like crazy Saturday and Sunday. So I may have to wait more weeks to find a good time if I'm trying to work this into a regular job schedule. At any rate, I'm out here this morning on public land where there's a lot of this juniper, which is a fuel I'm used to using in the Southwest, and I'm gonna try to get that little bowl fired. On my way out here this morning, I stopped at a store and bought a newspaper and a lighter, which is basically all the gear I need for firing. The other thing I need was a shovel. I'm gonna use the shovel to kind of handle the hot pot because I don't have gloves. And then also, as a safety precaution, in case the fire starts getting away, it's good to have a shovel so you can kind of, keep it in check. And I'm setting aside the news section and the comics so I can bring them home and look at them later. But I'm burning the sports section because studies have shown that's actually all the sports section is good for. I apologize for sounding a little froggy this morning. I've developed a bit of a cold here. As I mentioned at the outset, getting started in primitive pottery is not always easy. There's a lot of concepts that you have to kind of get your head around. And so it's hard to kind of get that all done at once. A great place to start is what you're doing now, watching these videos on my channel, because I cover all of these subjects. But if you want to make more progress, faster progress, you might want to check out my website. I have all kinds of stuff there for the person who's trying to learn and practice primitive pottery. I have tools, things like gourd scrapers and pookies that you need in order to build this pottery, but I also have blog posts going deep on these subjects. So if you're the kind of person that learns better by reading, I have some of that. I also have these online video-based master classes that go deep. This is a great way to make fast progress in any of these subjects. I have 4 different areas: outdoor pottery firing, wild clay, coiling pottery, and natural pottery paint, slips, and pigments. I also have weekly Wednesday night Zoom classes. So if you're interested in primitive pottery at all, check out my website. I'm pretty sure I have something there that will help you. After I finished preheating the pot, I set the camera up looking down on the firing. I carefully arranged the coals. I set rocks on top of the coals. I carefully set the hot pot on top of the rocks, and then I carefully selected the firewood and arranged it in teepee fashion over the pot. That started to burn, so I took the camera, I repositioned it so that it was farther from the heat, and it was at that point that I realized that I'd forgotten to press the record button. And so that footage doesn't exist. So you'll have to imagine it here as I go forward with the firing from this point. All right, let's talk about the results. Everything came out real good, but not exactly as I expected. So first of all, did it fire hot enough? We can hear that, it's tinky. So it did fire hot enough. It is ceramic. Color-wise, my whitest white is that Arizona white, which, I guess I expected, but I'm still a little disappointed that I didn't get a very good white from these Montana slips. Actually, this number 2, this O2 here, is relatively light. It's a nice, buff color. It'd make a good contrast. You get a lot of contrast actually with that paint. And then, let's talk about the paint. I was 90% sure that yellow clay would fire red, and it's, it's kind of burnt orange. So not a bad color, but not what I expected. You certainly could, as I said, get a lot of contrast between that burnt orange and that buff slip, enough to do some nice decoration. So I'm gonna keep looking for red. I think there's enough iron around here that I can find something that's gonna fire redder than that. But in the meantime, I also think with the body clay I have, with the light slip I have, and with that yellow clay, I could start making nice looking decorated pottery from materials here in Montana. So that's what I'm gonna do going forward. The next time I fire, I'm gonna fire something, something nice, not just a test pot, using what I know, but then I'm also gonna keep experimenting. I'm gonna keep trying different clays and slips, and maybe in my firing, where I'm firing a nice pot, I will also have, a test pot with some different slips or paints on it, or, trying different things, so that as you are going forward, you're continuing to learn more things about different materials, but you're able to make things you want to make as well. Not everybody lives in an area where there's so many nice clays as here in Montana, and I understand that. I mean, the first clay I used, I didn't test a lot of the body clays. I just grabbed a clay, put a pot together out of it. It worked out okay. But where you live, it might not be so easy. There might be a lot more poor quality clays, and you're having trouble finding one you can use. And so there's a whole process to go through in testing clays to find one that works. And I made a video a while back all about, testing different clays, how to test them, figure out which one is best. And I'll link that up right over here. So you can go watch that, learn more about testing different clay sources. I appreciate you watching today. I'll catch you next time.